Greetings, friends, and welcome to In the Scriptures, where we explore a variety of topics from the Bible and their significance to the time that they were written in, and more importantly, their significance to us today. My name is Craig Fish, and I hope that our time together today will be as much a blessing for you as it is for me. How one understands the Bible, or any written work for that matter, depends a great deal upon the preconceived notions they have as they approach the text. If one chooses to see the Bible as the Word of God dictated to mankind, and as being applicable in all times and in all places just as it is, but they do not consider the context within which something is being stated, then chances are that they will miss the truest and deepest meaning of the text, and will most certainly miss out on what it is that God is trying to convey to us now, and how something was conveyed to someone else at some other time and in some other place. Now, this does not mean that parts of the Bible do not apply anymore, but rather, in order for us to know how the Bible applies to us, we also need to understand how it applied to the people that any given passage of the Bible was directly given to. Part of understanding this is in how things were communicated in other times and in other places, and also what kinds of things were going on at the time any particular message is being given. One very simple example for trying to understand what a message means to the people it was given to comes to us from the 10th chapter of the book of Jeremiah. Here we read, "Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the Gentiles are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are futile. For one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen, with the axe. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so that it will not topple." This passage is taken by some to refer to a Christmas tree, but that is not at all what Jeremiah is talking about. Rather, Jeremiah is addressing a custom of the time that was built on the idea that little spirit beings lived in various trees and bushes, and that if you brought one of those trees into your home and made it look really nice, and the little spirit being was pleased with what you did, then they would bless your home and make things go well for you. But if you left the tree outside in the weather, and the little spirit being became angry because of that, then they might take their anger out on you and your home by bringing bad things upon you. This kind of thinking, of course, was not at all true, in that the very next verse reads, "They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot go by themselves. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good." This whole thing is a practice from pagan idolatry that Jeremiah is referring to, and he is bringing it up in the context of creating a contrast between the fact that God is the living God and there is no other, whereas these little spirit beings are nothing to be considered because, well, they don't exist. So we can see that this has nothing to do with a Christmas tree, even if what it is that is being expressed in the passage sounds like that is what is being talked about. But if one chooses to approach the text of the Bible with the thought that what is contained in the Bible directly speaks to the context of our time and place, then they will miss what is actually being addressed. This passage from Jeremiah is by no means the only portion of the Bible that can easily be misunderstood or misapplied. We have to understand that the Bible is a book that was written over a course of nearly 1,500 years in no less than 3 languages, and by 40 or more authors ranging from kings to priests to peasants. The circumstances under which portions of the Bible were written ranged from being in a state of exile to running for one's life, to everything going well, to being invaded by aggressive foreign forces. And many passages relate directly to engaging in activities and religious practices that were an abomination in the eyes of God and still are today. But without recognizing these different circumstances in their proper time and place, then we will never truly understand what God is communicating at any of those given times, or what people are communicating about their own situations. But these circumstances are not terribly hard to figure out most of the time. Rather, there usually are enough details provided to us in the Bible so that we can piece together what it is that is happening. And in a number of cases, the historical details that we find outside the Bible help us to fill in the blanks that are sometimes not elaborated upon very much in the Bible. All of these kinds of details are vital to knowing what is being talked about in any portion of the Bible. Then, of course, there is the question of what is this or that particular purpose for this or that particular book being written? And what about when the stories from one book of the Bible are being told again in another book of the Bible, but the details are sometimes quite different, such as the differences between the four Gospels? One of the first things that we have to understand in those kinds of situations is that the author of one Gospel, say the Gospel of Matthew, is writing with a very specific purpose in mind and intending to convey specific details about the life of Christ to a very specific audience, such as the Jewish people, while another author, such as Luke, is conveying stories of the life of Christ to someone else in a very different context. What this means, then, is that the order of events are sometimes not as important as simply telling that this or that event happened. And it means that sometimes the details will differ slightly. Thus, each gospel account will have similarities and differences. Well, today, we reach back into the archive as we begin a journey through the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is a beautiful work in the Bible, in not only the manner in which ideas are conveyed, but also in how Christ is presented. There are also some very deep concepts that are brought up in the Gospel of John, and many of those concepts are brought up because of the preconceived notions that some people had at the time John wrote his account on the life of Christ. And John addresses these issues with the intent of seeking to correct errant understandings about God and Christ. When we near the end of our time together, we'll come back here for some closing thoughts. So now, without any further delay, let's get right into our study of the Gospel of John.
The Gospel of John is a very interesting gospel. I'm going to get into some nuts and bolts here in just a little bit. And I'm starting this sermon with the intent of walking through the Gospel of John. We're going to take some time. It's going to take quite a while because there's a lot to this. The Gospel of John is a very interesting and particular gospel. If you were to ever study Greek, either in the past or if you're thinking of doing it or if you will do it in the future, whatever, most likely you will study the Gospel of John. The reason being is because the Greek of the entire New Testament, or even in the Septuagint, the Old Testament Greek, the Greek in John is very simple, as opposed to the other books of the New Testament, which in most cases the Greek becomes very complex. You read through Matthew, you read through some of the writings of Paul in these original languages, and the structures, the grammar is very, very complex. Greek is a very complex language. But the Gospel of John is very different. The language is very simple. That's why anytime you take a course in Greek, the Gospel of John is what you go to because of its more simple nature. But don't let that fool you, because where the language itself is simple, where the added level of depth is that it is very deep. It uses simple language, but it expresses very deep and complex ideas. Okay? So there will be times where I will say, like, the concept that's being conveyed is, and Soraya always gets on my case about, don't talk about all those, the concept is this. Well, sometimes I don't have a choice. Because when we read things, we have to understand them in the context of who is writing it and who is it being written to, when is it being written, and why is it being written. This is what we call exegesis. It's a word I've thrown at you before. I'm going to throw it at you some more. So much so that one day you will wake up in a nightmare and say, exegesis! And that's what I want. So, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, there are those who take that first verse and they will say something like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Why would they do that? Well, there is this mechanism within the Greek language. Hebrew has it as well. And there are many other languages around the world that have something very similar to this. It's called a definite article. The definite article is something that shows up before a word. It's something that, in many cases, if it's translated, it will be translated as the. So it'll be something like, I see cars out the window here. I can say, go to a car, and it could be any car in the parking lot. But if I say go to the car, now it's very specific. Okay? There's one car in particular that I'm talking about, the car versus a car. And that definite article is something that points to, this is the main point of the sentence in many cases. Sometimes it's not always translated. It's just simply there to demonstrate this is the point of what we're talking about. This is the main subject that's being talked about right now. Well, where it says in the beginning, there's a definite article. En arche was the Word. There's another definite article, the Word. And the Word, another definite article, the Word, was with God. And the Word was God. Well, that last word, God, doesn't have a definite article. And as a result, because there's no definite article, you could legitimately translate it as a. But there is something going on within this very text that leads to not translating it as a. Take a second, look at that text. I want you to just imagine this. Remove the word word and the word God, and now read that text again, and what word pops up over and over and over? Was. The word was is acting as a connector. It's kind of this grammatical equation, if you will, to say this is this is this. Kind of like that A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. That kind of thing. Okay? That's a construction within the language, and it happens in more than one place. And so when we're looking at how John has constructed this sentence, he's saying that in the beginning was the Word. The Word was God, and this Word that was God, well, he was God as well. That's essentially what he's getting at. So he's saying that the Word is God. He was in the beginning with God. He's repeating himself. And this is another grammatical technique. You repeat something to demonstrate emphasis. In fact, actually, in the biblical Hebrew, sometimes they'll literally repeat a word in a sentence to create emphasis. So, I mean, this isn't something that would necessarily make sense in English. If we were to take, I get a kick out of sometimes when I hear people say, I just want a Bible that is translated literally, word for word, from the original languages into English. Well, it would not make sense if it happened that way, okay? Because the languages are just too different. So in the biblical Hebrew, for example, if I was talking about the car, but I was excited about talking about it, and I wanted to create emphasis of get to the car, then I would literally say, get to the car. Okay? Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That would make you think you had a speech impediment. All things were created through him, and without him, nothing was made that was made. So what's the point that John is driving at there in verse 3? Creation. This Word, who was God, was also the creator of all things.
Not evolution.
Not evolution, that's right. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, have you ever asked yourself, why are there 4 Gospels? Has that question ever popped into your head? Do we really need 4 separate accounts on the life of Christ? Not only that, but why are they all so different? Why is it that what we call the synoptic gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called the synoptics because they agree in many areas. Many of them tell some of the same stories, not necessarily with the exact same details and not necessarily in the same sequence either. I'll get to that in a little bit. But the Gospel of John is diametrically different than the other three Gospels in many ways. A lot of the stories that you find in the other three Gospels are not in John. In fact, John spends more time focusing on the last week of Christ's life than any of the other three Gospels do. Why are they so different? Well, again, this has to do with exegesis. There's a reason why John is doing this. In fact, it's very interesting. There have been some very in-depth studies done to the four Gospels, and this isn't something recent. This is something that goes back a long way. There have actually been symbols applied to the four different Gospels. For example, the Gospel of Luke, it portrays Christ as the burden bearer of sin. Okay? As a result, a burden-bearing animal has been applied to the Gospel of Luke as a symbol to represent that gospel. Can anybody guess what that animal might be? An ox. Okay? The Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew is considerably shorter than all the other Gospels. I mean, it's almost half as long as the rest. It's almost, when you're reading through Matthew, it's almost, I'm sorry, not Matthew, Mark, it's almost like this excited little kid trying to tell a story. And then it came to pass, and then it came to pass, and then it came to pass, and then it came to pass. That's the way Matthew reads. And Matthew also presents a very human side of Christ as well. As such, the symbol of a man has been applied to the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Matthew. Can you think of what kind of symbol might be applied to the Gospel of Matthew? Well, first of all, who is Matthew writing to? How does Matthew start his gospel? What's the first thing that he starts to talk about? The genealogy. That's right. Interestingly enough, Luke does the same thing, but they're two totally separate genealogies. Matthew, he does his genealogy through Joseph, all the way back to Abraham. Luke does his genealogy through the men of Mary's side of the family, all the way back to Adam. Very different genealogies. Why is Matthew starting his gospel going through the genealogies back to Abraham? What is he doing? Why is he doing that? Who is he writing to? Who is Matthew writing his gospel to? He is specifically writing it to Jewish people. And he is pointing the genealogy to Abraham to demonstrate that Christ is not only a son of Abraham, but a son of David. That's where the Messiah had to come through, a son of David. And he has lineage that we can point back to Abraham. In fact, if you read through Matthew, one of the issues that comes up is, we know who you are. They're talking to Jesus. We know who you are. In other words, we know the circumstances of your birth. What were the circumstances regarding Jesus' birth? One big wow, Mary was pregnant before Joseph and Mary came together. A big no-no. Something that could have gotten her killed. Okay? Matthew is presenting Christ as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. When we read about the cleansing of the temples that Jesus does, where are those stories most prominently found? In Matthew. So as such, the symbol of a lion is attributed to the Gospel of Matthew. A lion, a man, and an ox. What kind of symbol do you think might be attributed to the Gospel of John? Well, John, here we have John. All these other Gospels have been written. The epistles have been written, all the letters that Paul wrote and everything. That's all been done. John now is, many years later, he has, well, it's kind of hard to tell necessarily when the Gospel of John was written. It was probably after his exile to Patmos. He didn't die on Patmos. He was exiled to Patmos. That's where he wrote the book of Revelation. He was then allowed to come back into society after a while. And that's probably when the Gospel of John was written. Maybe. It's kind of hard to really pinpoint. But we can tell that there are some very interesting aspects. The Greek in the Gospel of John is meticulously perfect. The Greek in the book of Revelation is a mess, a horrendous mess. And I'm not talking about sloppy handwriting. I'm talking about the grammar. These languages, Biblical Hebrew and Greek, are languages that are set up so that the grammar has to be done in a very particular way. This has to agree with this, gender, number, all kinds of different things. I'm not going to get into all that, but there has to be agreement, grammatical agreement throughout the structures of things, so that you know what relates to what. For us, we do it simply in word order in the sentence. Okay? Word order. That's how we do the exact same thing. For Greek, you didn't necessarily have to have the words ordered right, because it's the way that the words are spelled within the sentence that tells you how they're being used. Is it a subject? Is it an object? Is it a noun? Is it a verb? How you spell those words really has a lot to do with all of that. So they don't necessarily have to be in a particular order. It just has to be how they're spelled. In Revelation, what we see is the grammatical mess of the language, which tells us that the person who wrote it may not necessarily have had the greatest level of knowledge of the Greek language. And that's okay. However, when we get to the Gospel of John, a book that is attributed to the same person who wrote Revelation, it's completely different. The grammar is meticulous. Well, how could the same person write these two books? Did he write Revelation, then go off to college, learn how to write Greek, and come back and then write the Gospel of John? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Most likely what happened is he had a scribe who actually wrote it out. They may have kind of bounced ideas off. This is what I'm trying to say, John. John is talking to his scribe. This is what I'm trying to say. I want to say, that God, Christ is the Word. He was in the beginning. And so the scribe is taking these things in and say, okay, so how's about enarche, hin, halagas? Ooh, I like it. Yes, that works. And halagas, and they start constructing the language and being very careful with how they're wording it. And incidentally, if a scribe is involved in the writing of any of the books of the Bible, that's not a big deal. It does not in any way diminish the inspiration of the book being written. Jeremiah was written by a scribe twice. Because the Jeremiah scroll was written once, presented to the king didn't like it, he ripped it up, so they had to rewrite it. So what we have recorded in the Bible is most likely from that second edition. The second copy. Okay? Not volume 2, edition 2. Jeremiah, edition 2. None of that in any way diminishes any of the inspiration of the scriptures. So, when John is writing his gospel, there is a particular mindset that has been creeping into the church at that time. It's called Gnosticism. Everybody say Gnosticism. Gnosticism. Has anybody heard of Gnosticism? Okay, Gnosticism, some of you are nodding yes. Some of you perhaps don't want to admit that you never heard of it. That's okay. Gnosticism is this philosophical concept that ultimately you can reach God through special knowledge. Okay, that's what Gnosticism, the word Gnostic means knowledge, gnosis, knowledge. And part of Gnosticism is this idea that God is so high and He is so holy that He can in no way commune with mankind, or else we would just burst into an infinite number of pieces because of God's direct communication or direct interaction with us. That's a part of Gnosticism. As such, in order for Christ to have any kind of divinity, in order for this character, Jesus, to have any kind of divinity, what God has to do is He has to create a lesser God who's not quite as high and not quite as holy as Himself, and then that God creates another God who is again not quite as high, not quite as holy, and again and again and again, until you get far enough removed from the highest and holiest God that you have a being that's still got some divinity in it, but can also now communicate with mankind, and that's Jesus. That's what Gnosticism gets into. John comes right out of the gate combating that idea. Said, no, 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 no. There is no levels of divinity. There is no level of godness in this. The Word was God. And then later he says, and this very same Word became flesh, and he dwelt among us. I'll get into that later. As a result of the direction that John is taking in his gospel, he is very deliberate in pointing to the divinity of Christ. That is one of his primary goals in the Gospel of John, is to point to the divinity of Christ. As such, the symbol of an eagle has been applied to the Gospel of John. Well, why an eagle? Why couldn't it be just any old bird? Well, there's all kinds of birds that they can fly. I remember the first time I saw a turkey fly, I thought I was seeing things, and it was the messiest kind of flight I ever saw. Here's this big lumbering thing, just like he was scared to fly or something. And when he finally got to his destination, he had this look on his face like, oh, I finally made it. And there's other birds that when they fly, like hummingbirds, I mean, those things are incredible to watch go. But nothing matches an eagle. They catch those wind currents, they just hang out their wings, and they soar. You know, they fly for a bit, but the things that help eagles really get along is the fact that they soar. And they can be way up there. And they have such incredible eyesight. They can be way up there, and they can see a mouse hundreds of feet below them. And just zoom right in and catch it. Sometimes maybe it's a fish down in the water. Incredible things. It's also thought of, I've never interviewed any eagles, so I don't know if this is quite true, but it's thought that an eagle can look directly into the sun and not have its eyesight affected. As such, the symbol of an eagle is applied to the Gospel of John. Now, is there any other place in the Bible where we can think of those four symbols or those four creatures appearing together? Any other place? A lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle. Any other place? I'm here in Daniel. Revelation. Where in Revelation? I'm not looking for book, chapter, verse. But where are they in Revelation? Geographically located. Right, and they're what? They're standing around the throne, right? The four living creatures, the four living beasts. One that looks like a man, one that looks like a lion, one that looks like an ox, one that looks like an eagle. They're standing around the throne, and what are they doing? They're saying, praise God, praise, holy, 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 you know. Any place else. I'd invite you to turn with me, if you will, please, to the book of Ezekiel. You don't have to go very far. It's right in the first chapter. So here Ezekiel, chapter 1. Ezekiel is in vision. He receives this vision. This is the whole wheel within a wheel thing. But there's these angels also that they have their wings touch when they move. When they stop, their wings fold in. And when they move, they come back out and they touch tip to tip again. And they move wherever they're going to go. But listen to this. This is verse 5. Also from within it came the likeness of four living creatures. And this was their appearance. They were in the likeness of a man. And each one had four faces. Each one had four wings. And their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of calves' feet. They sparkled like the color of burnished bronze. The hands of a man were under their wings on their four sides. And each of them had four faces and four wings. Their wings touched one another. The creatures did not turn when they went, but each one went straight. And incidentally, the word turn there, it's not like the specific word that's used in the Hebrew means an angle, to move like this. They did not do that. They went straight. Anywhere they went straight through. It was a straight line. Verse 10, as for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man, each four had the face of a lion, on the right side the face of an ox, on the left side and the face of an eagle. Interesting. So here we have these four living creatures in Revelation that stand around the throne. We have these four angelic beings in vision that each has a face. They all have four faces of a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. And interestingly enough, They go straight. Anytime they move, they go straight. Is there any place else you can think of where these symbols appear? Well, this one I wouldn't necessarily expect anybody to jump up and say, I know where it is, because it isn't actually explicitly stated. But if you go back to the books of Moses and you read the depiction of how the camp is structured, okay? It talks about this tribe is on the east, and these tribes are on the west, and these 3 tribes are on the north, and these 3 tribes are on the south. And you have the tabernacle in the middle, and you have very specific groups camped immediately around the tabernacle. Well, it tells you what tribe is on what compass point of the camp. It starts with the first one, and to the right side will be this tribe, and then another tribe. And it tells you specifically which one. And then it tells you that they have their standards posted, or their flags. That's what the standard is, the flag. Okay? Well, interestingly enough, we have the tribe of Dan, we have the tribe of Judah, and the tribe of Ephraim. Those are 3 of the 4 prominent tribes on the different sides of the camp. And what do you know? What do you suppose the flag was for the tribe of Judah? A lion. A flag for the tribe of Dan was a soldier or a man. The flag for the tribe of Ephraim was a ox. And then you have another tribe that has a flag that's standard is an eagle. Coincidence? We have the tabernacle in the center. We have the tribes, the people of God, camped on the outside. The camp structure was set up identical to the way an Egyptian pharaoh might set up a military camp if they were off on some campaign. Okay? But we have these very same symbols of their flags posted at the 4 compass points. We have the 4 angelic beings in Ezekiel 1 who each have 4 faces with the same 4 resemblances. We have the 4 living creatures in the book of Revelation standing around the throne. And the camp of Israel with these people all camped out around with their flags. What's at the center? The tabernacle. More specifically, in the tabernacle, the most holy place, which is what? A depiction of the throne room of God. In Revelation, we have these 4 living creatures around what? The throne of God. In Ezekiel, with those 4 angelic beings, when they moved, they put their wings out to touch tip to tip. Did they go around anything? They went straight forward. We have these same 4 symbols applied to the 4 Gospels. When the Gospel is proclaimed, it cuts straight to the heart, straight to the issue. It doesn't go around anything. You are a sinner, and you need Christ. There's no way getting around that. It's a straight message that you cannot get around. You try to go around it in some way, you're twisting it. But what is at the center? The center of the gospel, what I'm about to say is probably going to sound like heresy. I ask that you hear me out and then judge for yourself. At the center of the gospel is the throne of God. What is it? What is it? Think about this for just a moment. What is it that brought sin into existence in the first place? Did sin happen first on earth? Where was the first place that sin happened? In heaven. And what was it that brought that to be? Isaiah 14. Isaiah 14. What is in Isaiah 14? It's Lucifer. It doesn't necessarily say Lucifer, but the language that's depicted there, you can tell that it's Lucifer. Okay, it talks about the king of Tyre, but the king of Tyre is being symbolically used to represent Lucifer, because when it talks about walking among the cherubim, walking in the presence of God, there's no question who this is talking about. Full of wisdom and beauty. But what does he say? I will ascend to the Most High. I will be like God. Who wanted it? It was Lucifer, wanting more than what was rightly his to have. How is it that he could get to that? Do you attack God frontally? Well, Lucifer's full of wisdom. If I don't mean anything about what I'm about to say, but if I don't like the president and I want to take the president out, I can go and try to attack him directly, but what's going to happen to me? I'll get 10 feet within him, I'll be tackled by a dozen Secret Servicemen and beat to a bloody pulp, hauled off to prison, he'll never see me again. Or I can start to subvert his authority by talking to the people and getting you to not like him either. I can start twisting details about what this person has done, who he is, make you question his character. Is there anything in the very recent past where we have seen that very tactic used? It happens in politics every single day. We just had this whole Judge Kavanaugh thing. And what was the primary motive of attacking, or the primary tool of attacking Judge Kavanaugh, but to attack his character, to make you question his suitableness? Okay? And they've done it with everybody. Every single presidential campaign around history has done the exact same thing. You don't attack your opponent by saying, well, he doesn't really stand right for this or this or this, because a lot of those issues, because there's so much diversity in the idea of these issues, those sometimes don't really pull much weight. What they end up doing is attacking their character, make you question their suitableness for the office. Well, isn't that exactly what Lucifer does? He made the angelic host, or at least some of them anyway, question whether or not God really was who he exactly said he was. Was he really fair and just as he claims to be? This is how you attack God. You attack his character. And what is the one thing that stands for his character? The throne. You subvert the throne by attacking the character of the one who sits on the throne. If you want a successful campaign, that is how you do it. Every successful military campaign throughout history, even just most recently as, Desert Storm a few years ago, that's all happened in our lifetime, but you go back even to times like Alexander the Great, and they did the exact same thing. You make the person that you're looking to conquer look like the tyrant, and you make yourself look like the liberator. Okay? That way the people who are under the control of this person that you're attacking, they're like, hey, yeah, this guy is a tyrant. And yeah, hey, if these people come and they defeat this king who's over top of us, then we'll have the freedoms that they're claiming we will have. And what were some of the things that the Greeks were promising? Alexander the Great. Education, a common language, a common economy. Okay, people were looking at that saying, yeah, this is a good idea. That's how Alexander the Great was so successful in his military campaigns, aside from his military prowess, but he got the people to fight with him as much as possible. Lucifer does the same thing. He makes you question the one that you're following. You question that one you're following enough, pretty soon you find yourself not following them. As such, sin begins in heaven by the questioning of the throne of God. What is that thing? We now are, of course, in the mess of sin because primarily, yes, we can say Adam and Eve, but primarily because of Adam. Okay? Read the account in Genesis. It's very clear. When God is pronouncing the curse of sin upon Adam and Eve, it's very specific that the whole world is cursed because of Adam. Okay? Because of Adam's failure, we are in the mess that we are today. What is that thing that we are being restored to? The Bible talks about the restoration of all things. In the book of Acts, the restoration of all things. What is it that we are being restored to? Christ came, he died on the cross to restore us to what? In the book of Revelation, talks about the 144,000. talks about the great multitude. There are a variety of ideas what those are. I personally hold it they are one and the same. 144,000 are the great multitude. They're just two different ways of referring to the same group. Where are they? When it talks about the 144,000, there are two places where it talks about them. One of them says specifically that they are before the throne. Okay? If the 144,000 and the great multitude, I'm not going to get into why necessarily right now, why I believe that they're one of the same groups. If the 144,000, their place of redemption is before the throne of God, then what is it that we are being restored to? What is it that we are separated from now? We're separated from holiness. We're separated from the lawgiver. We're separated from the throne of God. That's what the cross is all about, is to create that connection back so that we can be able to be restored to the throne of God. As such, when we give our gospel account, when we tell somebody what the gospel is, we can talk about the crucifixion, because that's what makes the gospel possible. Without that, it's empty. Okay? So I'm not trying to diminish the cross in any way, shape, or form, because the crucifixion of Christ is vital for everything else to happen. But if when you're telling somebody about the gospel, if you're leaving out that it centers on the throne of God and His authority, then it's not complete. Just like the gospel doesn't end with the crucifixion. There's also the whole second coming thing that's a part of it too. What we refer to as the full gospel. It's the whole thing. It's a big picture. The crucifixion is what allows redemption to even happen in the first place. But it doesn't end there. Because if all we have is our sin debt paid for, great. What next? Your sins are paid for. Now what? Are you still going to die? If time goes long enough, every single person in this room will eventually breathe your last and pass away. So therefore, the crucifixion, the death of Christ, has done what? It has paid for your sin debt, but we're all still going to die eventually. What is the promise? That you can get into heaven. And that happens when? At the second coming. When the dead in Christ rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up to meet them in the clouds. Thus we shall ever be with who? The Lord. Restored back to the Lord. Who is it that will be crowned as the one who sits on the throne? Christ. Interestingly enough, it says the language that's in Revelation talking about to him that overcomes, I will allow him to sit on my throne as well. Well, the depiction there, it's not like there's this throne. You know, we get these ideas of like these kingly thrones where there's only one person can sit on it, and maybe another chair over here where maybe the queen would sit, and maybe another chair over here where the prince might sit, or things like that. But that's not actually the picture that's painted. When you really look at the wording, again, in the Greek, it doesn't really come out in the English very well, but the picture of the throne of God isn't just this little tiny seat that only one person can sit on. It's something that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people can all sit on at once. It's like a couch. It's this beautiful picture where, guess what? You can sit on the throne with the king. So therefore, what is it we are being restored to? What is it have we been broken off from? We've been broken off from the very thing that we want to be restored to. Interestingly enough, because of the restorative work that Christ has done, we will become greater than what we were initially made to be. Adam was to dominate the earth. Adam and Eve were to dominate the earth. Christ was made a little lower than the angels when he came to be on this earth. Upon his resurrection, he took his place back where he could be, so that when he appears, we will be like he is. He was divinity, became humanity. It's not like he was divinity and he put on humanity like it's some kind of coat. No. Locked together. Divinity and humanity are eternally and intrinsically locked together in the person of Jesus Christ, never again to be separated in any way, shape, or form. And that is something that we should be saying amen to that. Because that means that the throne of the universe is a human being sitting there. As such, when the resurrection happens, when the restoration, the transfiguration that we refer to, when that happens, we will be made above the angels. We're not going to be below them. We're not going to be confined to the earth as Adam was. Or perhaps we could say as Lucifer is now. It's not going to be like that. Eventually the capital of the universe will be brought here. Amen. Now here's the last point that I want to make. Verse 5. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now some of your versions, depending on what you have, might say something like, and the light shone or shined in the darkness. Puts it in kind of like this past tense kind of a word. Okay? But in the Greek, it's actually a present tense. The light shines. And where it says that the darkness could not overcome it, that is a past tense. The light shines, and the darkness could not overcome it. Tried, but it could not. Whenever there is darkness, and you turn on the lights, the darkness has no choice but to leave. It has no choice. It can't push back. Darkness has no choice but to leave when the light comes on. The light shines in the darkness. Now, the reason why some of your translations may read shone or shine, try to put it into a past tense kind of a wording. Some commentators say that this is what they call a historic present, whatever that's supposed to be. Isn't that still kind of a past tense, a historic present? Something that history. Where is history? It's in the past, right? A historic present. They try to come up with all these complex ways of saying things because when it comes to translating them, they try to make the tenses fit a little bit better. But personally, if the grammar in the Gospel of John is so meticulously done, so carefully crafted, that the writer intended to write a present tense for the light shines, I personally believe that he intended a present tense, that the light still shines. And the darkness could not overcome it. Some versions may say comprehend. Same kind of thing. Overcome, comprehend. And the point is that today, the light still shines.
And the light still shines, my friends. Darkness had its chance to overcome, but the nature of light versus darkness dictates that the darkness could not have the mastery of the light. Friends, when you allow the light of Christ to shine in your heart and mind, the darkness has no choice but to leave. What a promise that is! The light still shines. Yes, there is darkness in the world, but the light still shines. Yes, the darkness can seem overbearing at times, and it will seem like the darkness is gaining the victory. But my friends, if you will truly allow the light of Christ to shine in your life, then the darkness will not have the victory. But ironically, the distinction between darkness and light in spiritual matters is not as easy to decipher as one might think. The reason why is because the prime enemy of God, Satan, masks many of his deceptions in such a way so as to make them look as though they are right and in line with the Word of God. And this brings me to part of the purpose for the writing of the Gospel of John. In the time when the Apostle John wrote this account on the life of Christ, there was an ideology that was going around and gaining traction with some of the people known as Gnosticism. This ideology, or line of thinking, was really rooted more in Greek philosophy than it was in the Bible. You see, the Bible states in 1 Corinthians 1:22, "For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom." That is exactly what we see happen in the Bible. Several times the Jewish people ask Jesus for some kind of a sign to demonstrate his authority. We also see, though, that some of the Greeks that are mentioned in the Bible, such as in the book of Acts, are seeking after wisdom, or shall I say, after some kind of a rational argument with which to stand on in order for the claim that Jesus is the Christ to be substantiated. We see this in the 17th chapter of the book of Acts, where the Apostle Paul is in Athens, and the Greeks there bring him to what is called the Areopagus, so they can learn this new doctrine that Paul was proclaiming regarding the unknown God. They say to Paul, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak, for you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore we want to know what these things mean." And then the Bible tells us, "For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing." So we can see that for the Greeks, this whole thing of expounding upon some idea for the increasing of one's own level of knowledge was a big deal. This was all part of what today we call philosophy, which is a word that comes from the Greek language meaning a love of wisdom. Now, why this is so important is because Gnosticism, which comes from the Greek word meaning knowledge, had at its core the idea that you can only find God through some special knowledge that only a few will ever know. Of course, like many things, Gnosticism had many parts to it, and one of those primary driving forces in Gnosticism is that Christ was not innately divine. Rather, any divinity that he may have had was of a far lesser degree than that of God. Now, this is something that will come up again as we move through the Gospel of John, because the presence of Gnostic ideas was such an important part of why John penned this Gospel account. Therefore, we will come back to it from time to time. But for now, I would like to take a moment and discuss the opening of the Gospel of John in a bit more detail. You will recall from our study together how it is that Gnosticism taught things like God being too high and too holy for there to be any direct communication with mankind, because if there was, the person that God would have spoken to would have been destroyed by the highness and holiness of God. Therefore, in order for there to be any kind of direct communication from God to mankind, then the message would have had to have been delivered by someone or something that was not as high and not as holy as God is. Therefore, by the very nature of this thought, Jesus could not have been God. Rather, at best, Jesus could have been some being of lesser divinity than God, which would in turn bring about the idea that those that are mortal or human could also obtain to a level of divinity. And this was achieved by acquiring that special knowledge. Essentially, the teachings of Gnosticism hold that we, as people, are something from the heavenly realm first, and that if we achieve that special knowledge about who we truly are, then we can return to that heavenly realm and be equal with Christ. This very same kind of thinking is reflected in the saying that I have seen that says, "We are not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we are spiritual beings on a physical journey." But friends, that is a lie straight from Satan himself. God made us as physical beings, but Gnosticism teaches that you are more than your physical being, that you are actually more than what God has made you to be, which, if you think about it, sounds a lot like the lie that Satan told Eve way back in the Garden of Eden when he told her, "You will be like God." Now, this also leads to another part of Gnosticism regarding your true self being separate from your physical self, and that is that you are not really accountable for what your physical body does because it controls your actions because you are a slave to what your body desires. So then, after you achieve that special knowledge that will lead you back to the divine reality from which you originally came from, then it doesn't matter what you do in your body because you are already guaranteed a place in heaven. Does that sound at all familiar? The idea that you can be guaranteed a place in heaven once you have achieved a special knowledge? This same idea is present in some forms of Christianity, in the idea that once you accept Christ as your Savior, then you are saved and guaranteed a place in heaven no matter what. It's what is known as once saved, always saved. But friends, that kind of thinking is actually rooted in satanic thought. And that is where the issue of discerning between light and darkness in spiritual matters can be difficult. And what makes it even more difficult is that a few passages from the Bible are cherry-picked here and there in an effort to support this idea, but they are taken out of their context and misapplied in a manner that is very similar to how we saw that passage from Jeremiah 10 at the beginning of this program. John opens his gospel by stating from the very beginning that Jesus is God, fully God. The God that we read about in the book of Genesis is Jesus. He is the one doing the creating of this world. There is no thought in the Bible about varying degrees of divinity. You are either divine or you're not. There is no in between. From the very opening of his gospel, John pushes back against a number of Gnostic ideas throughout this account on the life of Christ. And friends, many of those same ideas are still around, and we need to push back against them as well. Thank you for joining us today for In the Scriptures. It has been our pleasure to be a part of your day today. If there is anything that you would like to connect with us about regarding anything that is covered on In the Scriptures, then you can send us an email to contact@inthescriptures.com. That's contact@inthescriptures.com. If you would like a full-length DVD copy of this program, then you can again use that same email address of contact@inthescriptures.com. We also have a free offer at this time that comes to us from the ministry It Is Written and is simply titled Seeing the Signs. If you would like your free copy of this study guide, then again use that same email address of contact@inthescriptures.com and let us know how to get your free copy of Seeing the Signs into your hands. We look forward to hearing from you and engaging in an uplifting dialogue where we can all be built up in what is in the Scriptures, and most importantly, that Christ is glorified. Once again, that email address is contact@inthescriptures.com. Thank you again for watching. Have a wonderful and Christ-centered day. Since the time of mid-November 2019, the coronavirus known as COVID-19 began spreading from Wuhan, China, and was declared a public health concern on January 30th, 2020. The response to this condition has led to testing methods for the virus that can give a result in minutes rather than weeks. These efforts demonstrate the great possibilities of humanity. But there is something that you can receive even faster than within minutes. Rather, you can receive it instantly. The Bible says, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins. The Apostle Paul then instructs us to be imitators of God. So in the same way that God forgives us, let us also forgive one another and receive the instant forgiveness and result of a heart test for purity. My name is Craig Fish, and let's remember to live every day according to what is in the Scriptures.